I want to get right into it because there's so much to talk about. Your fund is barely 2 years old. For those who might know, please explain first, what is the Amazon Climate Pledge, and then how did the fund grow out of that pledge?
Sure. Thank you, Diana. So in 2019, Amazon made the Climate Pledge, which was a voluntary commitment to entirely decarbonize all of our operations by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris objective in 2050. And we established a membership-based organization together with Global Optimism, which is the Cristina Figueres organization, challenging other companies to do the same. But what we realized is, as Amazon, we shouldn't just sit idly by on the sidelines waiting for other people to develop the technologies and the business models that can help decarbonize our operation, right? Otherwise, we might be waiting until 2040 before someone has a hydrogen-powered airplane or something like that that works for our operations. Instead, what we should be doing is putting money at work and, more significantly, doing everything that we possibly can to invest in companies with our time, with our energy, with our commitments to purchase from them in order to help accelerate the way in which companies that we invest in help us to address our climate pledge. And so we set aside a $2 billion initial commitment from the Amazon balance sheet to be making venture stage investments in companies that can help us decarbonize.
And you started initially with companies that would, of course, be connected to Amazon. That is, in electric vehicles, in greener packaging, and in supply chain technology that might help with those. But how have you expanded beyond that?
I would not say that we've expanded beyond the idea of focusing on companies that can help Amazon in its mission of sustainability. I would actually say that as a screening criteria, like any investor, obviously we're looking for strong entrepreneurs. We're looking for companies that have a business model that's scalable and profitable. But really the discipline that we apply ourselves is to only invest in companies that address issues that are uniquely Amazon. But when you step back and think about the breadth of Amazon's operations, aviation, long-distance trucking, packaging materials, we operate a major grocery store chain. It's kind of hard to find a sector of the economy where we are not actively engaged. But something that you may not think about when you think of Amazon is we build a lot of buildings, right? We build fulfillment centers and data centers. And into those buildings goes steel and concrete. Building materials are an enormous source of carbon emissions. I think steel alone is like 10% of global carbon emissions. And so those are areas where we have grown the scope and the mandate of the fund.
And it's interesting that you mentioned steel. Just this morning in my inbox, I got a release from a company called Electra, which is a green iron company that produces low-temperature iron with no carbon emissions. And it says Amazon is, of course, a backer. Now, how, with these smaller companies, do you compete with, say, larger steel makers or larger companies within the same space that are also using green technology to, say, green steel? Because there's companies like I can never say this right, ArcelorMittal.
ArcelorMittal.
Exactly, which is doing the same thing, but they're a global company.
Well, I think one of the things that Amazon is uniquely poised to do is help early stage companies, help startup companies scale through the power of our ability to be a large purchaser. So we can demo new technologies, including lower carbon concrete or steel technologies. We can provide feedback, but we can also then place anchor orders or spec it into the orders that are coming from our construction contractors, so that ultimately, by nature of the scale of our operations and by virtue of our purchasing power, we're able to help those companies compete. And if they have a more sustainable business model than the incumbents, we will do everything within our power to help them become the new incumbents.
So you talk about these small startup companies. Now, I do a series on startups called Clean Start, airs every Monday at 2 o'clock in Power Lunch. I'll just plug that. We only started the series about 9 months ago. We've profiled over 20 climate startups, and I will tell you, I get at least half a dozen pitches in my inbox every day from other startups that want to be profiled. You've got $2 billion. I don't. So how do you decide, because I imagine you're getting a lot more than half a dozen, how do you decide what is not only a good company, a good technology, but also a good investment? Because those are not always the same thing.
That's a great question. I would say that our analysis is twofold. The first is classic, what any venture or financial investor will do. Look at the strength of the management team, look at the financial projections, look at the total available market, and look at the customer unit economics. Is this company able to solve a problem and provide a solution for customers at a price point where the customer is willing to pay or where the customer can actually save money, ideally? But the second screen, that's probably more important in sorting the hundreds of things that come into our inboxes collectively as a team over the course of a month, down to what we want to focus on, is what are Amazon's largest carbon emission challenges? And we may see a fantastic company that's solving a carbon problem, but if it's not an Amazon carbon problem, there's nothing that we can really do to help that company. And so we limit ourselves to those companies where there's a technology we can adopt. So I'd say, like, how do I conduct due diligence? Well, we bring in experts from Amazon in steel, concrete, construction, fuels, whatever that area is, in order to help make that assessment. We determine whether adopting that technology can actually make Amazon more sustainable. And then we see really what else can we do as Amazon to help that company become bigger, stronger, better, faster. And if there's nothing that we can really do to help, if it's just a purely financial investment, we stand by. That's really the place for classic VCs. What we're doing is strategic. And therefore, bottom line, what's the difference between something we'd invest in and something not? It's something where we've made the decision we'd like to be a customer of this company when they get to scale.
But how important is that return on the investment? Because clearly you want to grow the fund so you can help more companies over the long term.
So we are not a philanthropic organization. We're absolutely in it for profit. And so the financial return is one of many criteria. But I'd say within our screen, we focus on the environmental impact first and the financial return second. If it looks like it's going to be a money loser, obviously we do not make that investment. But one of the benefits of being able to become a customer of these companies that we've invested in is that ability to purchase helps put them on the map, helps establish a credibility to that company. And so there are things that we can do within our power to make those companies ultimately more valuable and more accretive. Maybe most significant case in point is Rivian, the electric vehicle manufacturer, where we made a purchase commitment for 100,000 electric delivery vans. And not surprisingly, we chose to invest in the company pre-IPO.
So how much do you care about competition in these investments? Because when I do these stories about the smaller companies, we list how many investors there are. And so many times, there's, either 6, 8, more than a dozen sometimes investors. And a lot of the times I'll see Amazon as well as Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' fund, which is a very large one, Khosla Ventures, big money investors. Do you care about competition, or do you think that that just elevates the company anyway and you're happy to share in the returns?
We're happy to share in the returns. We are not a control investor. We oftentimes do not take a seat on the board of directors. The way that we seek to add value is by adding things that we can uniquely provide, by helping a company with artificial intelligence and machine learning, if that's useful, by helping give them the skills of how to onboard 1,000 workers in a very short period of time, by bringing them engineering expertise, by demoing product, giving them feedback, placing anchor orders, purchase orders, things like that. And so it's not like that field becomes crowded if there are other investors. We actually play very well with other investors. And in much the same spirit as the establishment of the Climate Pledge as a membership-based organization of 375 other, plus more than 375, other signatories who are making that Climate Pledge, we're quite pleased to invest alongside other investors who can also help these companies along, driving adoption and adding value in the ways that they can uniquely add value.
And how much do you believe that the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had huge money for climate, helped the private investment community? Because we talked a lot last year about how government wasn't stepping up and how it would really take, while billions in government money would go toward climate, it would be trillions in private capital. But I've heard from other investors that getting that act passed recently really gave a jump start to the private sector investment in climate, because it gave investors sort of the confidence that there would be government backing and that there would be more money coming into these.
I think you've said it far better than I could say it, Diana. That's spot on. And so I think that there is a greater comfort and confidence that we have for a longer period of time, a visibility of policies that are supportive of an energy transition, of a fuel transition, of a decarbonization that help you make investments, particularly on the early stage, right? Your big fear is, I'm investing in something that's a zero carbon aviation fuel, and by the time they're at market with scale, whatever incentives have been created to help drive the adoption and ultimately take the cost out, if those have vanished, vaporized by the time, or expired by the time that company is at scale, man, it's really hard to justify putting the money into it early. And now what the IRA has done is it's given us long-term visibility on support and incentive, which is great for decarbonization goals.
You know, I want to get back to the pledge, though. We've talked a lot about the investment in the funds, which is great. But, you know, we use the term ESG very broadly. We use the term pledges very broadly. You have a lot of companies who have signed on to your pledge. We have the Paris Agreement. We have countries that have signed on to pledges. Every day I get another announcement from another company saying we have pledged this by 2030, 2040, 2050. Sometimes you can make any kind of pledge, but if you don't deliver on it, there's been a lot of criticism that by 2050, we're not going to get there. And even the Paris Agreement, there's no way we're going to get to that level that's been pledged by so many countries. For all of these companies that have, great, they've made the pledge, how real is that pledge to getting to the actual reality of net zero? And how hard will that be?
I, first of all, am an optimism and a believer in technology. And second of all, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of companies other than Amazon. What I can tell you is that from within the company, from within Amazon, our commitment to that pledge is very real. Right? What did we do? We went out, we bought the naming rights to the major hockey stadium and concert arena in Seattle. And we didn't name it the Amazon Arena. We called it the Climate Pledge Arena. You drive down downtown Seattle and you see Climate Pledge in enormous letters. It's, I mean, in some ways, it's like we created a mechanism where it would be just so impossible to put the toothpaste back in the tube without humiliating ourselves that we are sticking to that pledge. We made a commitment that we would power our operations with 100% renewable energy by 2030. We're 85% of the way there. At Amazon, we are now the largest non-utility, the largest corporate purchaser of renewables. And we're on track to be 100% renewable by 2025, 5 years ahead of that initial goal. We've made, again, a commitment to be 50% net zero shipment on all of our shipments by 2030. And I believe we're going to hit it. And Jeff Bezos has a kind of what's become across Amazon and more broadly quoted an expression that I think is really quite beautiful, that good intentions don't work, mechanisms do. And by making the climate pledge, by putting climate pledge up in major lights across Seattle, by setting aside $2 billion for a climate pledge fund, those are the kinds of mechanisms that will keep us on track for delivering on that pledge.